Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. When the whole town is watching you like a Netflix thriller, just know you're not the villain. You're the plot twist they didn't see coming. Let's get one thing clear. When a chosen one walks into a spiritually asleep community, it's not long before that town starts acting like a crime scene. Everybody suddenly turns into a detective, an FBI agent, or a false prophet with a badge and a Bible. And here's a creepy little fact for you. According to psychological studies, mob mentality is so powerful that a group of people will believe a lie about someone they've never met, just because their circle does. Yeah, your name got passed around more than the offering basket on a Sunday morning, and half the people didn't even know why they were mad at you. They just heard the sirens and joined the parade. But here's what they didn't count on. The Lookoo wasn't your downfall. It was your divine unveiling. So buckle up, because this ain't your average chosen one fairy tale. This is the story of how a whole town banded together, called in the Lookoo, blasted the sirens, whispered in corners, filed bogus reports, and still failed to take you out. Oh, and spoiler alert, God turned their surveillance into your stage. Let's get into it. Number one, they never expected the one they were watching to be the one who'd flip the script. They never expected the one they were watching to be the one who'd flip the script. That's the part that's eating them alive. At first, they treated you like a nobody. Just another face. Another soul they could control, label, and quietly destroy if needed. But you didn't just survive the surveillance. You used it to see them more clearly than they ever saw you. While they were watching your every move, waiting for a slip-up, you were studying their patterns, decoding their hypocrisy and waking up to the game. You weren't paranoid, they really were trying to trap you. But what they didn't realize is that God had already given you the wisdom to outmaneuver the whole operation. They thought the cameras and the whispers would make you shrink. But instead of losing your voice, you started sharpening your discernment. You stopped explaining yourself, you stopped trying to fit in, and once that shift happened, it was game over. You flipped the script. You became the one doing the watching, not with your eyes, but with your spirit. You started picking up on who was fake, smiling in your face while privately praying for your downfall. You realized that their concern wasn't concern at all. It was control in disguise. Every time they plotted, it only added more power to your purpose. They turned your life into a silent investigation, but it backfired, because now they're the ones being exposed. The way they treated you when they thought no one was looking, it's echoing. God saw it all. And now, He's letting the truth roll out like thunder. The same mouths that mocked you are suddenly quiet. The same people who used to watch you are now paranoid, looking over their own shoulders. Because once you flipped the script, you became a mirror, a living reminder of everything they tried to bury. You weren't just under surveillance, you were under divine protection. And that's the part they'll never understand. They thought they were watching a weakling, but they were watching the rise of a warrior. And now they have no choice but to sit back and witness what happens when a chosen one stops hiding and starts walking in power. Number two, your presence activated a silent panic across their power structures. Your presence activated a silent panic across their power structures. The moment you walked in, something shifted, not because you said anything loud or dramatic, but because your energy didn't match the dysfunction they were comfortable with. You didn't come in trying to prove yourself. Yet somehow your spirit started rearranging the whole atmosphere. People who once ran the room suddenly felt uneasy. Conversations changed when you entered. Eye contact got weird. Fake smiles tightened. It wasn't anything you did wrong. It was everything you carried. There's a spiritual authority that follows chosen ones, even when they're unaware of it. You don't have to speak to expose darkness. Your presence alone disrupts it. That's what caused the panic. They weren't afraid of what you'd do. They were terrified of what your light might reveal, the way you move without pretending, the way you see through people without calling them out, the way your energy naturally challenges anything fake or manipulative. It makes people who rely on control feel like the floor just dropped from under them. These weren't just random people feeling awkward. We're talking about the ones who built their status, their identity, and their influence on deception. People who use spiritual language to cover spiritual rot. Folks who played gatekeeper in a place where they were never meant to have keys. You came in without asking for permission, and that exposed how little they truly had. You didn't argue, beg, or fight for a seat. You just showed up and their entire structure started shaking. And here's the twist that keeps messing with them. You didn't even want their power. You weren't trying to take their spot. But your authenticity threatened the entire system. Because if you, with no connections, no alliances, no compromise, could walk in and command respect just by being who you are, then what does that say about everything they had to fake to be accepted? That's why they panicked. That's why the whispers started. That's why they began moving against you in private. Not because you were wrong, but because you were real. And in a place built on performance, your presence became the one thing they couldn't control, ignore, or silence. Number 3, they called in reinforcements because you ruined the ritual of control. They called in reinforcements because you ruined the ritual of control. That's the truth they won't say out loud. See, the power they held wasn't based on truth. It was based on illusion, fear, repetition, a silent agreement to keep things the same, even if it meant stepping on people like you. But you didn't play along. You didn't bend. You didn't flinch. And you didn't shrink yourself to make them comfortable. And once they realized you weren't going to fold under their usual tactics, they panicked and brought in backup. These weren't ordinary reinforcements. These were people hand-picked to intimidate, confuse, or isolate you. Spiritual manipulators, community gossipers, even people who smiled in your face but were secretly assigned to monitor and report on your every move. They used systems like religion, family, culture, and even law to try and box you in. You made them nervous because you wouldn't stay in the place they tried to trap you in. Your strength threatened their structure, and they couldn't handle that. You weren't just resisting, you were dismantling. Without even realizing it at first, you were pulling apart the illusion. Your peace exposed their chaos. Your clarity made their confusion look staged. You weren't loud, but you were consistent. You weren't bitter, but you were bold. And that messed up everything they'd built. You didn't need their approval, and that's exactly why they saw you as a problem. So they did what weak systems always do when threatened. They multiplied the pressure. They started forming little alliances against you. Suddenly, people who never even interacted with you had a problem with you. The lies grew legs. The gossip spread like fire. But all of it was just smoke to cover the fact that your presence revealed how fake the whole setup was. You didn't ruin their structure. You revealed it was already crumbling. Calling in reinforcements was their last desperate move to stop what they couldn't explain, because you weren't just standing firm. You were becoming unstoppable. You were living proof that someone can be chosen, mistreated, overlooked, and still rise with power that can't be bought or silenced. And that, more than anything, scared them into strategy. But even their reinforcements couldn't reverse what God already revealed through you. Number 4, you're the receipt they didn't want God to keep. You're the receipt they didn't want God to keep. They were banking on your silence, your breakdown, your disappearance. They figured if they pushed you hard enough, long enough, you'd snap, and they could bury the evidence under the excuse of your instability. But you didn't snap. You grew. You didn't fold. You endured. And now your very existence is a walking, breathing testimony of what they did in the dark. You are the divine documentation they thought they could erase. Everything they did, the gaslighting, the setups, the lies, the public smear campaigns dressed up as concern, was done with one goal: destroy you quietly before the truth could speak too loudly. But now the truth is speaking, and it's speaking through your survival. Every smile on your face, every step you take in purpose, every boundary you enforce is evidence, undeniable proof that you didn't just live through it, you outgrew it. What's worse for them is that they can't stop talking about you. They keep your name in their mouths, hoping to spin a new version of the story. But every time they speak, they dig a deeper hole for themselves. The details don't line up anymore. Their lies are getting sloppy. Their nervous energy is starting to show. And it's not just people watching, heaven's watching. God's been collecting the receipts, the screenshots, the motives, the timing. There's a spiritual paper trail. And you're the confirmation number they can't cancel. You weren't just hurt. You were used as the final piece of evidence. They did everything in their power to discredit you, and yet here you are thriving. That's what they didn't count on. They didn't expect you to become living proof. And now, you're the subpoena they can't dodge. You're the case file that won't close. And no matter how much they deny, downplay, or deflect, the truth has already been stamped by God, delivered, documented, and divine. Number 5, their unity was fueled by fear, not power. Their unity was fueled by fear, not power. They didn't come together because they were strong. They came together because you scared them. And that fear disguised itself as strategy, prayer circles, community meetings, secret group chats, all designed to make it look like they were in control. But under all the noise was raw desperation. You walked into their world, and without even trying, you disrupted the false peace they built on silence, control, and spiritual manipulation. You were never truly outnumbered. It just looked that way because fear gathers fast when truth enters the room. They couldn't stand alone against you, so they grouped up. Not because you were dangerous, but because you were different. You didn't need their approval to exist. You didn't need their platform to be powerful. You didn't need to kiss the ring, play the game, or repeat their broken traditions, and that terrified them. Your freedom exposed their bondage, so they masked their fear as authority. Some used religion, quoting scriptures to shame you and weaponize faith. Others used status, flexing roles, titles, and positions to intimidate. Some just gossiped and stirred confusion, hoping the crowd would do the dirty work for them. But none of it was real authority. It was all insecurity dressed up in robes and badges. The bitterness they carried turned into a fake sense of unity, all because one person, you, walked in with truth they couldn't control. What's wild is they would have never linked up on their own. Some of them didn't even like each other. But the fear of your light made even enemies unite temporarily, because it was never about truth. It was about stopping the one thing they couldn't manipulate, authenticity. That's why you felt such heavy opposition. It wasn't that you were in the wrong place, you were in the right place, and that's what made their masks fall off. They gathered because they were weak. They moved in numbers because none of them had the courage to confront you alone. But you weren't alone. Heaven was backing you the whole time. And now their fake unity is crumbling, because anything built on fear will always fall in the presence of real power. Number 6, you're the mirror. They've been trying to break for years. You're the mirror they've been trying to break for years. Not because you did anything to them directly, but because your presence exposed everything they've been trying to hide. Your light unsettled their darkness. Your peace irritated their chaos. Your resilience reminded them of every part of themselves they abandoned to survive in a system built on faking it. And every time they looked at you, they were forced to face the truth they buried deep about who they've become and who they'll never be again. You weren't just someone they didn't like. You were someone they couldn't unsee. You reflected what they lost: innocence, clarity, courage, conviction. You reminded them of the version of themselves before the masks, before the compromises, before they traded authenticity for acceptance. That's why they fought you so hard. That's why they whispered your name in back rooms, made up stories, started campaigns to discredit you. You didn't just trigger them, you revealed them. They couldn't destroy you, so they tried to distort you. They couldn't crack the real you, so they tried to build a fake version and feed it to the crowd. They painted you as unstable, rebellious, dramatic, too sensitive. Anything to take the attention off the fact that their reflection was screaming back at them every time you entered the room. You didn't have to say much. You didn't have to argue. Just being yourself, raw, honest, and unshaken, made their carefully constructed images start to crack. But what they didn't realize is this: mirrors don't break that easily, especially ones forged through fire. Your life was never about reflecting them for their comfort. You were sent to reflect truth, whether they liked it or not. And every time they set off a siren or whispered your name with venom, they were confessing something about themselves. Their fear, their guilt, their shame. Because in the end, their issue was never truly with you. Their issue was with what they saw in you that they could no longer find in themselves. They didn't want to face the truth, so they tried to shatter the one holding it. But you're still here, whole, chosen, unbothered. And the reflection is only getting clearer. Number 7, their fake emergencies were disguised. Attempts to silence a real revelation. Their fake emergencies were never about helping you, they were about silencing you. All those sudden concerns about your mental health, your lifestyle, your decisions, your well-being. That wasn't love. That wasn't genuine worry. That was damage control. They knew what they did. and they knew if anyone actually took the time to hear your side, they'd have a full-blown truth explosion on their hands. So they did what cowards always do when they feel the heat rising. They pulled the alarm, created chaos, and called it concern. They painted you as unstable because your clarity scared them. They said you were delusional because your discernment was dead on. They made up crises so they wouldn't have to answer for the real one. The fact that they abused, mishandled, manipulated, and misjudged someone who was sent to heal what they helped break. They couldn't handle the thought of your voice being taken seriously, so they beat you to the mic and tried to speak over you with urgency, with drama, with false authority. Some of them used religion, praying over you in public while cursing you in private. Others used family, whispering about you like your growth was a threat instead of a victory. Some used professional language, suggesting you needed help, guidance, or intervention. But what you really needed was freedom. What you needed was space to speak without being painted as a problem. They never wanted resolution. They wanted silence, your silence, because they knew what was buried beneath it wasn't confusion. It was clarity. And if anyone had listened closely, really listened, they would have heard the revelation rising from your quiet strength. Not bitterness, not revenge, just truth. Pure, piercing, and undeniable. That's why the sirens started, not because you were a danger to yourself, but because you were becoming dangerous to their image. You were the one thing they couldn't control, couldn't predict, and couldn't erase. So they faked the emergency and hoped it would be enough to keep the spotlight off them. But God never needed volume to speak. He needed endurance, and you endured. Now the same people who tried to mute you are watching their own words fall apart, while yours finally start to echo with power. Number 8, you survived a community built like a cult, and you walked out unbrainwashed. You survived a community built like a cult, and you walked out unbrainwashed. That's what really lit the fire under them. You didn't just reject their rules, you rejected their entire system. You refused to drink the Kool-Aid they'd been passing around for years. The fear, the guilt, the manipulation disguised as guidance. And the fact that you made it out with your soul intact, that's what they'll never forgive. They didn't raise alarms because you were unstable. They raised alarms because you started asking the questions they were too afraid to face. You noticed the patterns, the way obedience was rewarded, but independence was punished. How silence was seen as holiness, but your voice, that was rebellion. You noticed how they used scripture like a sword, not to defend truth, but to silence it. You saw how anyone who stepped out of line, anyone who thought differently, loved freely, spoke boldly, was either cast out or crushed. You were supposed to stay small. You were supposed to stay scared. They wanted you constantly second-guessing yourself, constantly needing approval, constantly apologizing for existing with power. But somewhere along the way, something in you broke free. You stopped buying what they were selling. You started remembering who you were before they started twisting it. And once that awakening began, they couldn't contain it. Your healing made you uncontrollable. Your clarity made you dangerous. You weren't sitting at their feet anymore, waiting for permission to live. You were walking in purpose, unapologetically, boldly, and with your eyes wide open. And to a group of people who were taught to worship image, that's threatening. They weren't protecting the community, they were protecting the lie. What makes it worse for them is that you didn't just walk away. You thrived. You got your mind back, your heart back, your freedom back. And that's the real crime in their eyes, because the cult isn't just a place, it's a mentality. And you were supposed to break under it. Instead, you became proof that the programming doesn't work on everyone. Now they whisper like you're the dangerous one. But deep down, they know the truth. You didn't just survive them, you outgrew them, and that's something they can't explain or erase. Number 9, you're not just the center of attention. You're the collapse. They're all witnessing. You're not just the center of attention. You're the collapse they're all witnessing. And deep down they know it. You're not trending because of scandal. You're trending because truth finally put on a robe and walked into the room, and it looked a lot like you. They thought they could keep playing the same game, pushing the same narrative, clinging to the same positions of power without consequences. But then you showed up, not to beg, not to conform, but to disrupt. And the moment your presence grew stronger, their whole illusion started falling apart. It's not gossip, it's prophecy. They thought it was just small-town drama. But this was always spiritual. You were sent as a warning, as a sign, as a walking declaration that the fake stuff was about to be exposed. And they ignored it, they mocked it. They laughed when you spoke truth. They gossiped about your gifts. They downplayed your discernment. But they didn't realize you were the divine alarm they chose to snooze. And now the time has run out. Every eye is on you now, but not because of fame. It's because your very existence is calling out their hidden mess. Not with rage, but with revelation. Not with bitterness, but with boldness. Your presence is a spiritual X-ray, revealing everything they tried to keep under wraps. The manipulation, the control, the lies, the abuse, the cover-ups. They were hoping to keep it quiet. But God had other plans. You became the red flag they ignored. And now that the consequences are rolling in, they're trying to spin the story, shift the blame, and cry wolf. But it's too late. The spotlight isn't on you for entertainment. It's on you because heaven is using you as the final warning. This is what divine justice looks like. Calm, precise, undeniable. You didn't have to lift a finger. Your consistency, your survival, and your truth did the work for you. They're not just watching you. They're watching their false empire unravel brick by brick, and the irony is you were the one they tried to bury. Now you're standing on the ashes, not as a victim, but as the revelation they swore would never come. Number 10, they didn't know watching you would turn them into evidence. They didn't know watching you would turn them into evidence. They thought they were building a case against you. But the whole time, they were building a case for you. Every lie they spread, every time they twisted your words, every moment they followed your life like a low-budget investigator, it all became spiritual documentation. Heaven doesn't miss anything, and neither did you. You just stayed quiet while they exposed themselves. They called it concern, but it was obsession. They disguised it as prayer, but it was surveillance. They talked about you more than they talked to you, thinking they could shape your image through rumors and manipulation. But all they really did was reveal their own intentions. While they were watching your moves, God was watching theirs. And now the files are open. The timestamps are sealed. Every false alarm, every fake emergency, every sideways glance that said, "Let's catch them slipping," has been logged. You're not the suspect in this story. You're the sealed scroll. You're the prophetic document that carries the receipts, the truth, the weight of what really happened. They were so busy trying to destroy your credibility that they didn't realize they were handing over evidence of their corruption in real time. And now the case has flipped. You're not being investigated. They are. Spiritually, emotionally, morally, the scales are shifting and justice is no longer on delay. And here's what stings them the most. You never had to retaliate. You didn't need revenge. You didn't even need a platform. Your life became the loudest proof. The fact that you're still here, still standing, still glowing, still free, that's what exposed them. Not a meltdown, not a public fight, just your resilience, just your peace, just the fact that you stayed grounded while they spiraled. They wanted to catch you slipping, but they ended up being caught watching, and now they're squirming because everything they did in the dark is showing up in the light. They didn't just watch you, they documented their own downfall. They became the evidence, and you're the divine receipt they can't return, erase, or pretend never existed. Number 11, you're the reason their rituals aren't working anymore. You're the reason their rituals aren't working anymore. And that truth is driving them insane. These people built their lives around patterns, emotional control, spiritual manipulation, public performance, and private sabotage. For years it worked. They used guilt to silence, fear to dominate, and religion to justify their hidden agendas. But then you showed up, not to play the game, not to pick a side, but to disrupt it. And ever since, the whole formula has been malfunctioning. They tried everything to make you fold. They labeled you rebellious, unstable, too deep, too spiritual, too sensitive. All of it designed to break your confidence and corner your spirit. But the more they pressed, the more you resisted. Not with drama, but with alignment. You stayed true to yourself while everything around you started unraveling. That's what they couldn't stand, because their rituals weren't just habits, they were spells. Unspoken agreements that everyone around them was trained to follow. Keep quiet, stay small, don't ask questions, don't break the pattern, but you didn't just question it. You shattered it. Your energy threw off the entire equation. You didn't respond like they expected. You didn't bow when they applied pressure. You didn't seek validation from the people they thought you'd depend on, and that's when they knew you weren't just a rebel. You were a variable, a divine interruption. The kind heaven sends when something toxic has gone unchecked for too long. And from that moment, nothing worked the same. The manipulation lost its grip. The intimidation tactics fell flat. The gossip backfired. Even their prayers, twisted by impure motive, started falling to the ground. Because you carry something they never accounted for. Real power, backed by real alignment. You're not bound by their rules. You're not powered by their approval. And that alone broke the rhythm they depended on to keep others in place. Now it feels like chaos. Not because you brought confusion, but because you disarmed it. You unplugged the system they used to feel in control, and all of a sudden, their rituals are nothing more than noise. The cloak has fallen, the charm is broken, and their old ways have lost their bite. They called you the problem, but in truth, you were the breaker of cycles. The walking disruption they couldn't contain. The evidence that when real power steps in, fake control dies quick. And number 12. They're not investigating you. They're investigating how you're still standing. They're not investigating you. They're investigating how you're still standing. That's the part they can't wrap their heads around. They know what they did. They remember the conversations, the lies, the pressure they applied behind closed doors. The setups weren't accidental. The character assassinations weren't innocent. They pulled strings, made calls, started rumors, and expected you to crumble under it all. But instead of losing your mind, you found your peace. Instead of breaking, you elevated. And now, they're shook. You were supposed to be gone by now. Isolated, ruined, forgotten. They thought the shame would crush you, that the false narratives would be too heavy to bear. But not only are you still here, you're thriving. And it doesn't make sense to them because they stacked the deck. They orchestrated the loss. They manufactured the storm. Yet somehow you're not just alive. You're flourishing. That's why they're whispering again. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because they can't figure out how their strategies failed. They didn't prepare for your glow-up. They didn't factor in divine protection. They underestimated your inner strength, your spiritual resilience, and the fact that heaven had already written your survival into the script. You became the loophole in their plan, the anomaly they didn't account for. You're walking proof that when God covers someone, no amount of betrayal, sabotage, or slander can take them out. Now they're watching you like they're collecting data, studying your every move, trying to reverse engineer your strength. Wondering what they missed, trying to understand how you're not bitter, not broken, not begging for validation. It confuses them, it frustrates them, because the version of you they tried to destroy doesn't exist anymore. And the version that emerged is too powerful for their old tactics to work on. They're not investigating out of curiosity, they're investigating out of fear. Because if you survived what they threw at you, then everything they've built, all their power plays, all their smoke and mirrors, might not be as strong as they thought. And deep down, they know it. They didn't just fail to break you. They accidentally revealed just how unstoppable you really are. Number 13, they laughed when you were silent, now they're shaking when you speak. They laughed when you were silent, now they're shaking when you speak. Back then, your silence made them feel powerful. They thought they had won. They took your quietness as weakness, your stillness as surrender. They convinced themselves that you were finished, that they could fill in the blanks of your story however they wanted, and no one would question it. And for a while they did. They told lies with confidence, rewrote history in their favor, and turned your name into a cautionary tale to boost their own image. Your silence gave them space to perform, but what they didn't know was that your silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. God had you in a quiet season, not because you were defeated, but because he was downloading something in you, something they weren't ready for. Your silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. It was where your power was being rebuilt, where your wounds were being turned into wisdom, where your discernment was sharpening like a blade. And now you speak differently. Your voice is no longer about being heard. It's about releasing truth. And every time you open your mouth, something in their false foundation starts to crack. You're not shouting. You're not even trying to convince anyone, but your words carry weight now. Divine weight. The kind that hits different, the kind that reveals, the kind that disrupts lies without even naming names. Now they're panicking because the same silence they mocked became the soil where your real power grew. You didn't need an audience to develop, you didn't need validation to recover, and when you came back with your voice fully restored, they felt it, not just in what you said, but in what your words did. Your truth started burning through the masks. People started asking questions, stories started unraveling, the grip they had on perception started slipping. They're not laughing anymore, they're watching their carefully crafted versions of you dissolve, and the more you speak, the more their false narratives collapse. Because when someone walks through fire and still has the nerve to speak truth with love, clarity, and conviction, it hits like judgment. They thought your silence was defeat, but it was the calm before revelation. And now your voice is the alarm they can't mute. Number 14, you're not the problem. You're the prophecy they feared would wake up the town. You're not the problem. You're the prophecy they feared would wake up the town. From the beginning, they could feel it. Something about you was different, off script, unsettling. You didn't move like the rest. You didn't chase approval or bow to the unspoken rules that kept everyone else in line. You questioned what they were taught to blindly accept. You saw what they were trained to ignore, and that made you dangerous. Not because you were rebellious, but because you were awake. You're the signal that the spell is breaking. The spiritual fog they cast over the community. The control through guilt. The silence through fear, the tradition dressed as truth, it started lifting the moment you showed up. Your life carries a frequency that shakes foundations. It's not just what you say, it's who you are. People can feel it when you walk in. They start thinking differently, they start asking questions, they start wondering why things never added up. That's what scared them most, not your presence, but the effect of your presence. You weren't sent to blend in, you were sent to interrupt. God dropped you in the middle of that carefully constructed illusion like a spiritual grenade. And you didn't even know it at first. You were just trying to survive, trying to heal, trying to stay true. But your truth was so disruptive, it started exposing everything around you. Broken systems, false leaders, recycled lies, hidden agendas. And one by one, the masks started slipping. That's why they moved against you so aggressively. Not because you did something wrong, but because they sensed what you carried. You were the answer to prayers they never expected to be fulfilled. A living prophecy that couldn't be bribed, controlled, or scared into silence. You didn't come to sit at their table, you came to flip it over. Now they're in a frenzy, trying to patch up the cracks, trying to discredit you, trying to regain control of a story that no longer belongs to them, but it's too late. The truth is out. The illusion is crumbling, and you're still standing, not as their problem, but as the proof that heaven always keeps its promise, even if it has to send that promise in the form of one person who refuses to bow. They thought they were watching a scandal unfold, but they were really watching a prophecy come to pass. From the false alarms to the forced unity, the desperate whispering to the public attempts at control, all of it pointed to one truth. You were never the threat. You were the truth interrupting a system built on lies. You didn't just survive, you exposed. You didn't just endure, you awakened. And no matter how many sirens they sounded, they couldn't drown out what heaven already declared over you. What they feared most wasn't your voice. It was your presence, because it carried something pure, something unbought, something unbothered. You came without a script, without an agenda, and still managed to shake the very foundation of everything they'd built their identities on. And now the smoke is clearing, the rituals have failed, the systems are malfunctioning, and all eyes are on the one person they tried so hard to erase. Let them scramble, let them stutter, let them pretend this is all coincidence. But you know better, and deep down so do they. You weren't placed in that town to join the circus, you were sent to shut it down. Not with violence, not with vengeance, but with truth that doesn't flinch and light that doesn't lie. So keep standing, keep glowing, keep speaking when led, and staying silent when it's sacred. Because every move you make now isn't just survival, it's fulfillment. And what heaven has started through you, no weapon, no rumor, no system, and no ritual can stop. You are not their problem, you are their prophecy fulfilled. If this message lit something in your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to let us know you felt it. Comment below and let your voice be heard. Your story, your strength, your survival might just be the confirmation someone else is waiting for. Share this with a friend, a family member, or that one person who needs to hear the truth unfiltered. And if you're walking this journey as a chosen one, walking through fire, flipping systems and still rising, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. We go deep here. We speak truth here. We don't do fluff. We do freedom. Welcome to your tribe. Now let's shake the gates together. God bless you.